Emily Carter sipped her morning coffee in the sunlit kitchen of her modest suburban home, the steam rising lazily in the cool dawn. The neighborhood was quiet, the occasional hum of a lawnmower or the distant bark of a dog punctuating the stillness. To anyone passing by, Emily seemed ordinary, another middle-aged woman tending to her home and her routines, smiling at neighbors, volunteering at the local school, living a life carefully stripped of danger. But beneath the calm, the tranquility, the daily rituals of grocery lists and PTA meetings, there lay a life no one knew. A life that had once been defined by speed, adrenaline, and the roar of engines that could crack the sky. 9 years had passed since Emily had last strapped into an F-16 fighter jet. 9 years since she had flown over deserts, oceans, and cities in a machine of raw power, her hands controlling a warbird that could outmaneuver anything in the sky. Missions that had tested her mind, her courage, her very humanity were tucked away in mental compartments she had promised herself she'd never open again. She had left that world behind, not because she had wanted to, but because life had demanded she adapt, and adapt she had. Now, as she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, she glanced at the small digital clock on the counter. 6:37 a.m. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, expecting a routine reminder for the school volunteering schedule or a notification about a drone workshop she ran for local kids. Instead, her eyes locked on a message that made her chest seize and her hands tremble slightly. F-16 down near civilian airspace. Immediate response required. Carter, we need you. Breath caught. 9 years. 9 years of careful hiding, pretending, excusing, burying, and now this. The message wasn't just an alert, it was a summons from a life she had meticulously locked away. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Her brain screamed at her to ignore it, to delete it, to go back to coffee and calm suburban normalcy. But instinct, the same instinct that had kept her alive in more skis and more seconds than most people could comprehend, ignited a spark that refused to die. Emily rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. She hadn't felt this level of tension in years, not since the cockpit, the countdowns, the split-second maneuvers that decided life or death. She walked to her closet and opened it. The sight made her pause. Her Air Force flight suit hung there, meticulously maintained, untouched for nearly a decade. Helmet on the top shelf, flight gloves folded neatly beside it. It had been almost ceremonial, a shrine to a past she had decided to let go. Now it seemed to call her by name, daring her, reminding her that she wasn't just Emily Carter, the quiet teacher, the museum volunteer, the drone mentor. She was Ghost Rider, the pilot whose call sign had once struck fear and admiration across the skis. Her thoughts raced as she considered the logistics. She didn't even know who had issued the call. The military rarely reached out directly after a decade of absence. This had to be urgent. It had to be catastrophic. And the thought of someone, anyone, depending on her, knowing she was the only one who could respond, sent adrenaline surging through her veins. She grabbed the flight suit with trembling hands, pulling it from the hanger. The material felt familiar, cold and slightly stiff, and as she ran her fingers along the insignias, the memories came flooding back. The smell of fuel in the hangar, the roar of engines that vibrated through her bones, the endless nights of training missions and combat sorties, all of it crashed over her. For a moment, Emily closed her eyes, letting herself feel the tension, the thrill, the fear she hadn't allowed herself to remember for years. Then came another notification. Her heart jumped. Coordinates updated. Situation worsening. Pilot in distress. Carter, you are our only option. Immediate deployment required. Her breath hitched. It was no longer hypothetical, no longer theoretical. Someone's life, maybe multiple lives, depended on her response. And there she was, out of practice, out of official duty, decades older than the fresh-faced pilots now training on simulators, yet called back because no one else had the skill, the instinct, the experience to manage the chaos unfolding. Her mind flicked through procedures almost automatically, muscle memory waking like a dormant predator. She grabbed the helmet, the gloves, her old flight boots. Every step in the closet felt surreal, like a dream overlaying reality. She could hear faintly in her memory the voices of former squadron members calling out commands, the sharp cadence of air traffic controllers, the crackle of radios in tense silence. She almost smiled, a tight, grim smile, realizing how natural it still felt. Almost like she had never left. The drive to the airbase was a blur. Emily's fingers drummed against the steering wheel in rhythm with her pulse. Her neighborhood blurred past, the suburban morning surreal against the storm that had erupted in her mind. What had happened? Why her? She hadn't served in frontline missions for years, yet the message had found her, as if the universe, or fate, or sheer luck had marked her as the only one capable. She arrived at the base and was immediately struck by the contrast of her quiet, domestic morning with the frantic urgency of military operations. Alarms blared, jets roared on the tarmac, personnel rushed with precise choreography that seemed both chaotic and disciplined. Young pilots, almost too young to shave, turned to stare at her as she approached the briefing room. She recognized some faces from briefings she had attended in the past, now instructors themselves, their respect for her evident in cautious nods and barely audible whispers. "Carter," a voice called out, sharp but controlled. It was the lieutenant coordinating the mission. "We're glad you're here. The situation, it's deteriorating faster than expected." Emily's stomach tightened. She knew she had seconds to process the intel, to strategize, to take action, but also that hesitation could cost lives. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Her eyes flicked toward the runway. A single F-16, its sleek form gleaming in the early morning light, awaited. The jet was a predator in weight, beautiful, deadly, and unforgiving. Emily's pulse surged. Memories of her own missions, her first solo flight, the adrenaline of high-speed maneuvers, all came rushing back. She wasn't the same pilot she had been 9 years ago, but instinct whispered that some things never left. The lieutenant's voice returned, insistent. "We need you to intercept immediately. Coordinates are locked. The pilot, he's counting on you." Emily's jaw clenched. The world narrowed. The quiet life she had built, the carefully maintained, ordinary existence, all of it seemed to collapse into a single, impossible moment. She didn't hesitate. She strapped on her helmet, feeling its weight familiar and grounding. This was no longer about her fears, her doubts, her years away from the sky. This was about the life of a fellow pilot, the potential devastation if she failed. And as she walked toward the jet, the roar of engines echoing like distant thunder, Emily felt the old fire reignite. The woman who had spent nearly a decade hiding behind routines and normalcy was returning, drawn back by a force stronger than time, stronger than fear. She climbed into the cockpit, securing harnesses, checking systems. Every panel, every dial, every flashing light was a friend from the past, guiding her hand. Her fingers hovered over the throttle. She exhaled, long and deliberate, and whispered under her breath, "Let's go." The engines roared to life, shaking the runway and the very ground beneath her. Emily Carter, the quiet neighbor, the teacher, the volunteer, was no more. In her place was Ghost Rider, back in the sky where she belonged, facing danger with nerves of steel, ready to confront the unknown. And just as the jet began to taxi toward the runway, her phone buzzed one last time, a simple message that froze her blood. "Carter, are you ready to save him?" She swallowed hard, gripping the controls, heart hammering. One wrong move and everything would be over. One right move and a life would be saved. She took a deep breath and the wheels lifted from the ground. The sky had called her back, and this time there was no turning back. The hangar doors rattled as the jet's engines roared to life, vibrating through Emily's bones, a primal reminder that she had returned to a world where seconds could mean life or death. The roar of the F-16 was deafening, shaking the concrete beneath her boots, yet beneath the noise she felt a familiar rhythm, a heartbeat syncopated with metal and wind, a pulse she had known intimately for years. Every fiber of her being screamed recognition. The smell of fuel and ozone, the hum of hydraulics, the subtle thrum of power beneath her fingers. It all felt like home. She glanced around the hangar, taking in the young pilots clustered near their jets, their wide eyes betraying awe, uncertainty, and a touch of fear. These were the next generation, the ones the Air Force trusted to carry forward the legacy of aerial supremacy. And yet none of them had the experience she carried, the raw, unfiltered understanding of speed, strategy, and survival that only time spent in combat could forge. They whispered among themselves, trying not to stare too openly, yet Emily could feel their curiosity and the silent questions swirling in the air. Who is she? Can she really do this after 9 years? A lieutenant approached, clipboard in hand, his face taut with urgency. "Carter," he said, voice low but commanding. "We've lost communication with the pilot. He's off course and descending rapidly. Civilian airspace is dangerously close and weather is deteriorating. Time is critical. You're our only option." Emily's stomach tightened. She had anticipated a challenge, but this was more than a test of skill. It was a test of instinct, courage, and memory. For a split second, she allowed herself to remember her early days as a young pilot. First solo flights, first combat missions, first life-or-death moments. The fear had been palpable, but she had thrived in it. And now, decades later, that fear was returning, but sharpened, urgent, impossible to ignore. "Coordinates?" she asked, already moving toward the F-16. The lieutenant handed her a small tablet displaying a digital map streaked with red alerts and flashing signals. The pilot in distress was mere miles away, dangerously close to a heavily populated zone. Civilian airliners were rerouted, but there was no margin for error. Emily's heart hammered against her chest as she studied the data, her mind already calculating angles, speeds, wind currents, and evasive maneuvers. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. Every second counted. Emily climbed into the cockpit, sliding into the seat with the ease of muscle memory that hadn't faded despite years of absence. The harness clicked into place, and she adjusted her helmet. Systems flickered to life, lights blinking across panels like stars against a midnight sky. She ran through a checklist in her mind, a ritual she hadn't performed in years but still knew by heart. Her fingers brushed over switches, levers, and screens, each touch a familiar dance. The ground crew cleared the area. Emily's jet taxied forward, the sound of engines deafening, echoing off the hangar walls, shaking the very air. She felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, a tangible presence pressing against her chest. Not only was a life at stake, hers, the young pilots, and countless civilians potentially below, but the stakes of her own return to the skis weighed heavily. Could she still fly like she used to? Could she trust instincts honed in a different era? As the runway stretched ahead, Emily's eyes flicked to the tablet again. The storm was closing in faster than expected. Radar indicated wind shear and turbulence. Lightning cracked across the horizon, jagged and blinding. She swallowed hard, gripping the controls with renewed determination. This wasn't just a mission. It was a collision course with every fear and hope she had ever experienced. She thought briefly of her life over the past 9 years. The quiet mornings, the mundane routines, the small victories of normalcy. Teaching drone workshops to kids, volunteering at the Aviation Museum, helping the local library with STEM programs. All of it had been a cover, a sanctuary from the adrenaline and chaos that had once defined her. And yet, even as she had buried that life, it had never truly left her. Every muscle, every reflex, every calculation was still alive beneath her calm exterior. The Air Force hadn't just trained her to fly, it had embedded a part of her very soul into the sky. Emily pushed the throttle forward, and the jet surged ahead, tires lifting from the tarmac as the roar of engines became a scream of liberation and purpose. The city below shrank, replaced by a blur of green and gray, clouds whipping past at impossible speed. She felt the familiar pull of gravity and the subtle resistance of aerodynamics, the constant conversation between pilot and machine. And then, in the midst of the storm, the distress signal blared in her headset. "Ghost Rider, you copy. Pilots unstable, coordinates locked, civilian airspace critical. You're the only one who can stabilize him." Her pulse spiked. Ghost Rider. The call sign she had abandoned, erased from official logs, whispered only in legend among old squadron members, now reverberating across the radio waves. The nickname felt like a cloak of expectation, heavy and demanding. She exhaled, steadying herself. "Yes," she replied, voice calm though her mind raced. "I copy, I'm inbound." The wind howled against the canopy, rain pelting the windshield in staccato bursts. Lightning illuminated the clouds in blinding flashes, revealing the other F-16 spinning violently, caught in a downward spiral. The young pilot's figure was barely visible through the storm, a desperate, flickering human presence in a metal bird that threatened to break apart at any moment. Emily's stomach twisted, a mix of fear and adrenaline that sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. Her hands danced across the controls, adjusting thrust, pitch, and yaw, instinct and muscle memory guiding her. Every maneuver had to be precise, every calculation exact. She knew the margin for error was microscopic. One misstep and the jet below could collide with the ground, or worse, the civilians scattered in the city beneath. As she closed the distance, Emily's mind raced through possibilities, contingencies, and outcomes. She remembered her training, rescue procedures, emergency stabilization techniques, tether deployment protocols, but hadn't applied them in years. Doubt whispered in the back of her mind, "Are you still capable? Can you save him?" But doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. She forced it aside. The young pilot's fate rested on her ability to act decisively, to command the sky with precision, courage, and nerve. Then a sudden gust of wind hit, twisting the F-16 violently. Sparks erupted from the fuselage as the jet rocked perilously close to a series of high-voltage power lines. Emily's heart skipped a beat. There was no room for error. The storm seemed to close in as if testing her, challenging her, daring her to falter. Her grip on the controls tightened, knuckles white, eyes scanning every angle, every movement. She had to reach him. She had to stabilize the situation before disaster struck. And in that heartbeat of sheer terror, she realized something profound. 9 years had passed, but she had never truly left the sky. Every instinct, every training session, every mission lived inside her, ready to spring to life when the moment demanded it. Emily whispered under her breath, a mantra that had seen her through countless crises. "Hold steady, trust yourself, bring him home." The jet beneath her shuddered, buffeted by the storm, and the young pilot's F-16 dipped dangerously. Time seemed to stretch, every second expanding into an eternity. Her heart raced, lungs burned, and adrenaline surged like a river threatening to break its banks. The city below blurred into streaks of gray and green. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos around her. And then, as she prepared for the first critical maneuver that could determine life or death, her radio crackled with a trembling voice. "Ghost Rider, if you can't stabilize him, we lose him. He's too far gone." Emily's pulse hammered. The storm, the danger, the years away from the cockpit, all converged in this single moment. She exhaled, jaw tight, eyes locked on the spinning jet. There was no turning back. The past, the present, the future, everything hinged on what she did next. And with that thought, she pushed forward into the storm, heart pounding, ready to face the impossible. The storm churned above like a living thing, lightning flashing in jagged arcs that illuminated the F-16 spiraling below Emily's own. Her hands gripped the controls, white-knuckled, every movement precise and rehearsed. She had been away from the cockpit for 9 years, yet every instinct, every calculation came rushing back with startling clarity. Muscle memory, intuition, experience, they all converged in a symphony of action and reaction, guiding her as the young pilot's aircraft pitched violently in the turbulence. The radio crackled, static cutting through the roar of the storm. "Ghost Rider, you're in position. You have 1 shot, coordinates locked. Civilian zones are critical. Can you stabilize him?" Emily exhaled sharply. "I can. Stay with me," she replied, though she couldn't see the pilot's face, only the silhouette of a human figure suspended in metal and chaos. The jet below dipped and swayed, dangerously close to clouds that were thick, black, and jagged with storm energy. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the plane could spiral out of control, slamming into the city streets below. She adjusted her speed, matching it almost perfectly to the descent of the F-16 in distress. The storm whipped her jet from side to side, testing her resolve, her precision, and her nerves. Lightning illuminated the sky in blinding flashes, revealing the pilot's eyes wide with fear. Emily felt a pang of empathy, remembering her own early days, the first solo flights, the first emergency drills that tested her in ways words could never describe. This pilot, young, inexperienced, yet terrified, was now entirely dependent on her. Emily leaned forward, scanning the cockpit instruments as she calculated her next move. She could deploy the stabilizing tether the Air Force had recently tested, a delicate operation requiring split-second timing, absolute precision, and nerves of steel. One wrong angle, one misjudged wind current, and both jets could be lost. She remembered the training vividly. The tether was a lifeline, but only if attached correctly. The thought of failure tightened her chest, sent adrenaline hammering in her veins. Her fingers danced over the controls, adjusting altitude, angle, and throttle. The young pilot's jet trembled, threatened by the storm's merciless winds. Sparks erupted from the wingtip as it clipped a stray electrical wire from the storm's turbulence. Emily's stomach lurched. There was no margin for error, not here, not now. She whispered to herself, almost ritualistically, eyes sharp, hands steady, trust instincts. Bring him home. She remembered the look on her squadron commander's face during her final mission, the same steely gaze that had tested her beyond fear, beyond endurance. Emily felt it now as if he were standing beside her. She let it fuel her, sharpen her focus. Every calculation mattered, every second stretched into eternity. The tether would need to hook precisely, or the pilot would be lost. She took a deep breath, heart hammering, and adjusted her jet for alignment. The storm seemed to recognize her determination, battering her with wind and rain as if testing her resolve. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the city below and revealing cars moving in panic, oblivious to the near tragedy unfolding in the sky above. Emily's mind raced through options, contingency plans, evasive maneuvers, all while keeping her hands steady, her mind focused. The tether's deployment had to be flawless. Almost there, she muttered under her breath. Her eyes scanned the spinning, tracking its every movement. 1 second too early and the tether would miss. 1 second too late and it would be useless. Emily adjusted throttle and pitch, leaning on the instincts she had honed over countless missions. Her fingers hovered over the release mechanism. Then a sudden gust of wind threatened to throw both jets off course. Sparks flew from the distressed F-16 as it tilted perilously toward a cluster of high-voltage towers. Emily's stomach twisted. Every fiber of her body screamed with urgency. The storm was relentless, the city below helpless, and the young pilot's life hung in balance. "Come on," she whispered, teeth gritted, heart pounding. "You can do this." She pushed forward, the jet responding with the precision she remembered, reacting as though it were an extension of her own body. The tether mechanism was armed. Emily aligned the tip carefully, factoring wind, speed, and turbulence. Inches would determine survival or disaster. The young pilot's eyes met hers through the canopy, wide and terrified, and for a fleeting instant she felt a connection, two souls locked in a moment of pure survival. With a steady breath, she released the tether. Time seemed to slow. The mechanism extended, a thin lifeline reaching toward the failing jet. The F-16 lurched violently and Emily's stomach dropped. Sparks showered around them, the storm screaming in fury. And then, just as the tether grazed the pilot's jet, the mechanism snagged, holding firm. The tiniest, most fragile victory, and yet it was enough. Emily felt the pull as the jet steadied, the young pilot's aircraft responding to the lifeline. Her hands worked furiously, adjusting every movement, every angle, every bit of thrust to ensure the tether held. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the jet began to stabilize. The young pilot exhaled in relief, or perhaps it was a prayer. Emily couldn't see, but she felt it resonate in the cockpit vibrations. The storm was far from over, but for a heartbeat there was a fragile calm, a reprieve from imminent disaster. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. She allowed herself a brief glance at the young pilot, seeing fear mixed with awe, respect, and an unspoken gratitude that words could never capture. She nodded just once. "We're not done yet. Stay with me." The radio crackled. "Ghost Rider, that was incredible, but the situation's still critical. You have to get him back to base. Civilian airspace is still in the path and the storm is intensifying. You're the only one who can do it." Emily's stomach clenched again. The first step had succeeded, but the job was far from over. She had stabilized him, yes, but now she had to navigate both jets back through a storm that seemed determined to shred them from the sky. Every second was a knife edge, every maneuver a test of skill, nerve, and endurance. Her eyes darted to the instrument panel, calculating wind speed, storm trajectory, and altitude. The city below sprawled out, unaware of the disaster averted, unaware that 2 lives hung by a tether and a woman's sheer determination. Emily's pulse surged. She had done this before, but never under these conditions, never with this storm, and never after years away from the cockpit. She felt the weight of responsibility press down like a storm cloud itself. Yet despite the fear, despite the adrenaline, there was clarity, focus, purpose. Ghost Rider had returned, and she would see this mission through. Emily exhaled, gripping the controls with renewed resolve. She leaned forward, aligning the jets for the first leg back toward base. The storm raged around them, but she would not falter. Not now, not after all these years. She whispered to herself, a vow and a command in one. "We're getting home. No mistakes. No second chances." And just as she guided the tethered jet into position, a bolt of lightning struck frighteningly close, blinding, illuminating the sky like an explosion of white-hot fire. The young pilot's jet shuddered violently. Emily's heart leaped into her throat. Another gust of wind, another jolt, and the delicate balance she had fought to achieve was at risk. Time stretched. Inches, seconds, heartbeats, everything teetered on the edge of catastrophe. The storm wasn't finished with them yet. The storm above had become a living, breathing adversary. Rain pounded the canopy of Emily's F-16 in relentless sheets, turning visibility into a blur of gray and white. Lightning jagged across the sky, illuminating the spinning silhouette of the young pilot's F-16 tethered precariously behind her. Gusts of wind threatened to twist and toss them like rag dolls, each second demanding absolute precision. Emily's jaw clenched as she leaned into the controls, every movement instinctual yet deliberate, honed from decades of high-stakes maneuvers. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest, a suffocating force more intense than the storm itself. Beneath her, the city sprawled oblivious to the life-and-death ballet unfolding above, where a single miscalculation could turn a rescue into a catastrophe. She glanced at the young pilot, his hands gripping the controls with desperation, eyes wide behind his visor. Fear radiated from him in waves, but there was also trust, a fragile, trembling trust that he had placed entirely in her hands. Emily's mind moved faster than the storm itself. Every variable, wind speed, turbulence, cloud density, storm trajectory, was logged, calculated, and adjusted for in real time. The tether connecting the jets strained against the violent gusts, and she could feel the delicate pull through the controls. One wrong angle, one abrupt maneuver, and both aircraft would be doomed. She knew she couldn't hesitate. Hesitation would be fatal. "Stay calm," she muttered under her breath, not just to the young pilot but to herself. Her heart thundered against her ribs, but she forced her breathing to slow, to steady, to channel the adrenaline into clarity. She reminded herself that fear was not the enemy, recklessness was. A bolt of lightning struck nearby, illuminating the scene like the flash of a camera capturing a nightmare in freeze frame. Emily instinctively veered her jet, avoiding debris from the storm and turbulence that threatened to tear through the tether. Sparks flew from the other F-16's fuselage, a dangerous reminder that time was slipping through her fingers. The storm wasn't just a backdrop. It was an active, chaotic participant trying to wrest control from her. She thought briefly of the life she had built in 9 years of ordinary existence. Quiet mornings, mundane routines, and predictable days. How far removed that life seemed now as she fought the sky itself for another human being's survival. 9 years had not dulled her reflexes or instincts. If anything, they had sharpened under the weight of memory and experience. She could do this. She had to. There was no other option. Emily scanned the radar for threats. Civilian aircraft had been rerouted, but emergency alerts indicated small planes in the vicinity and drones being flown too close for comfort. The storm was unpredictable, not just physically but operationally. Every second mattered. She adjusted throttle and pitch to maintain perfect alignment, the tether vibrating violently as the young pilot's jet teetered on the brink of disaster. "Ghost Rider, do you copy?" The radio crackled again. The young voice was strained, trembling. I think I'm losing control." Emily's stomach twisted, fear lancing through her like lightning itself. "Listen to me," she shouted over the roar, forcing calm into her tone. "Trust the tether. Follow my lead. You can do this. We're getting home. I've got you." The pilot gave a hesitant nod, though she couldn't see it, only feel it through the subtle vibrations transmitted via the tether. Emily exhaled, focusing every ounce of her mental and physical energy on the task ahead. The storm surged around them, gusts hitting like fists, lightning splitting the clouds. She banked the jet, pulling the young pilot with her, avoiding a collision with a towering cumulonimbus formation. Her muscles ached with tension, her nerves stretched taut, but she pushed every limit, drawing on the years of rigorous training that had never truly left her. Suddenly, a gust twisted the tether sharply. Sparks erupted from both jets where metal came perilously close to metal, a hair's breadth from catastrophe. Emily's heart skipped. She had to act fast, faster than thought, faster than calculation. Her hands moved on instinct, guiding the jets in a synchronized ballet, the kind of maneuvers that had once earned her medals, now being executed under more pressure than ever. Below, the city glimmered faintly through the storm, a patchwork of lights and streets oblivious to the chaos above. A single misalignment, a misjudged angle, and tragedy could strike not just in the air but on the ground. Emily's eyes darted between instruments, the canopy, and the jet behind her. The storm and its fury were relentless, but she was more relentless. She had been forged in the chaos of the skies, tempered by years of missions that demanded life-and-death precision. As she began a complex maneuver to ascend above the storm clouds, the young pilot's jet veered dangerously close to a formation of industrial towers. Emily's stomach lurched, instinct screaming. She twisted her jet, pulling the other F-16 along, narrowly avoiding metal spikes that could have shredded them both. Sparks flew, lighting up the storm like fireworks gone wrong. The tether stretched to its limits. A crackle of radio interference pierced through the roar. "Ghost Rider, you're too close, structural integrity compromised." Emily's pulse hammered. She knew the tether would only hold for a finite amount of time. One more miscalculation and they'd both plummet from the sky. Her mind raced, scanning variables, recalling protocols, remembering every training exercise she had ever executed. She had no time for doubt, no time for hesitation. Only action. Rain slashed against the canopy, visibility dropping to near zero. She relied on instruments, instincts, and muscle memory. The storm pressed against them from all sides, gusts threatening to break the tether and toss both jets into disaster. Emily could feel every vibration, every pull, every dangerous tilt. Her fingers flew over the controls, commanding the jets like extensions of her own body. "Hang on," she shouted, voice steady despite the chaos. "We're not done yet." The young pilot's F-16 lurched violently again, twisting as lightning illuminated the sky. Sparks erupted from the fuselage, trailing smoke. Emily's stomach tightened. Seconds felt like hours. She had stabilized him before, but now she had to navigate him through the storm itself. Civilian airspace loomed below, the city oblivious, the storm relentless. Emily leaned into the controls, making split-second adjustments. She pushed the jet upward, climbing above the worst of the storm, but the gusts followed, lashing at her wings with brutal force. Each second was a test of nerve, strength, and skill. She whispered a mantra she had used countless times before missions. Eyes sharp, hands steady, trust instincts, bring him home. The storm seemed to roar in defiance, hurling everything it could at them. Lightning cracked dangerously close, illuminating the twisted metal and flashing instruments. Emily felt sweat stinging her eyes but ignored it. The young pilot's life depended on her focus, her precision, her courage. And just as she began to guide them toward a temporary calm above the cloud line, a deafening crack of thunder shook both jets violently. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and Emily's stomach dropped into her chest. The storm was not finished with them. Her jaw tightened, hands steady. "Hold on," she whispered, not just to the pilot behind her but to herself. The hardest part was yet to come. The storm was a living beast, thrashing against Emily's jet with unrelenting fury. Rain lashed against the canopy, reducing visibility to near nothing, while wind gusts buffeted both her F-16 and the tethered aircraft behind her. Sparks flickered from the other jet, trailing smoke in the gray haze. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears, each beat synchronized with the violent vibration of her controls. Every movement had to be perfect, every calculation exact. One mistake, one misjudged gust, and both pilots would plummet into chaos. Her hands moved with precision, almost on autopilot, adjusting the throttle, rudder, and ailerons to counteract the storm's fury. Her eyes darted between instruments and the faint silhouette of the young pilot's F-16, whose body trembled with fear inside the cockpit. Emily could feel his panic radiating through the tether, but she also sensed trust, fragile and raw, but absolute. He was placing his life in her hands, a responsibility heavier than any she had carried before. She recalled every training exercise, every simulation, every combat maneuver she had executed during her Air Force career. Years of muscle memory surged to the forefront, guiding her movements with a clarity born of experience. She knew the tether's limits, the jet's thresholds, and the delicate balance needed to keep both aircraft stable. Yet, despite all her preparation, nothing could truly simulate a live storm, a spinning fighter jet, and a human life teetering on the edge. Lightning split the sky, a jagged flash that illuminated the chaos in stark white light. The young pilot's jet lurched violently, tilting dangerously toward a jagged cliff of clouds. Sparks arced between the fuselage and the tether as Emily fought to stabilize the situation. She gritted her teeth, every muscle in her body coiled with tension, as she leaned into the impossible task of pulling both jets into alignment. "Stay with me," she shouted over the roar of the storm, voice cutting through the static-filled radio. "Trust the tether, we've got this." The pilot's response was a shaky nod, his hands shaking visibly even through the canopy. Emily felt his fear, a palpable pulse transmitted through the taut cable connecting them. She let that fear drive her, sharpen her focus, rather than hinder her. This was no longer about courage or experience. It was about precision, instinct, and a willingness to face impossible odds head-on. She adjusted her flight path, banking sharply to compensate for a sudden gust that threatened to twist the tether out of alignment. Sparks flew again, and her stomach dropped. The young pilot's F-16 trembled as if on the brink of collapse. Emily knew that the next maneuver would require the full extent of her skill, a synchronized twist and climb that had never been attempted in a live scenario under these conditions. Every second would count, every miscalculation fatal. Her mind worked at lightning speed, calculating wind speed, thrust, altitude, and tether tension. She visualized the maneuver step by step, just as she had in simulators, but now reality added a level of unpredictability no program could replicate. Emily exhaled, forcing her breath steady, her heart pounding, as she initiated the first phase of the maneuver. The jet responded perfectly, climbing sharply as she twisted to the right, pulling the other aircraft along. The tether groaned under pressure, metal screeching as sparks arced around them. Rain slashed across the canopy, stinging her face, but she ignored it. The young pilot's eyes met hers for a fleeting instant through the visor, fear, awe, and hope flickering in equal measure. She couldn't let him see her doubt. She didn't have any. Emily's life in the Air Force had taught her to operate in these extreme conditions, to act decisively when the margin for error was microscopic. Every maneuver, every twitch of the controls, every adjustment was guided by instinct honed in the crucible of aerial combat. She pulled the tethered jet up, twisting it gently, matching her movements perfectly to prevent a catastrophic swing that could send them both spinning out of control. The storm seemed to fight her at every turn. Lightning cracked dangerously close, illuminating the swirling gray clouds and the faint cityscape below. Gusts of wind tried to rip the tether from its alignment, but Emily's hands were steady, unwavering. She could feel every vibration, every subtle pull of physics, transmitted through the controls. This was her world, and she was in command. She whispered to herself, a mantra she had used countless times in her career: steady, precise, every movement counts, bring him home. As she executed the maneuver, she realized the tether was reaching its limits. Another gust, another twist, and it could snap, sending the young pilot into freefall. Emily's mind raced, searching for solutions, recalling emergency protocols, trying to improvise a stabilizing move that had never been tested in live combat. Her heart thumped violently, but her hands never wavered. She had to trust her instincts completely. The jet lurched violently, the tether groaning under tension. Sparks showered them as the metal strained against the storm's fury. Emily's stomach flipped as she countered with a sharp twist, bringing both jets back into alignment just as the tether creaked dangerously. The young pilot's body relaxed slightly, but only for an instant. The storm was far from over. Emily adjusted throttle and pitch again, forcing both jets into a narrow corridor between two violent gusts. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the young pilot's terrified face. She caught a glimpse of his hands, shaking on the controls, and felt a pang of empathy. She had been there once, young and inexperienced, facing her first mission that demanded life-or-death precision. The memory fueled her determination. She could not fail. Minutes, or what felt like hours, passed as she guided the two jets in a delicate dance, threading through the storm's fury with precision and nerve. Rain pelted the canopy, wind gusted with unpredictable force, and lightning flashed in blinding arcs. Emily's body ached with tension, muscles trembling with fatigue, but she pressed on. She could feel the young pilot's trust in her, a fragile lifeline that gave her focus and purpose. Finally, she aligned both jets for a temporary reprieve, pulling them slightly above the thickest clouds. The tether groaned, sparks still flying, but the jets were stabilized, for now. Emily exhaled, heart hammering, sweat stinging her eyes, and allowed herself the briefest moment of relief. The impossible maneuver had worked, at least for the moment, but the storm wasn't done with them yet. The radio crackled. "Ghost Rider, incredible work, but the storm is intensifying and the approach to the base is treacherous. You'll need to navigate both jets through severe turbulence to land. Can you manage it?" Emily's jaw clenched. She had done the impossible, but the job was far from over. Her hands tightened on the controls, knuckles white, as she leaned into the challenge. "I can," she said, voice firm despite exhaustion. "We're not done yet." Lightning cracked again, closer this time, illuminating the chaotic sky and the tiny city below, oblivious to the life-or-death ballet happening above. The young pilot's jet trembled behind her, tethered to her with fragile threads of trust and metal. Emily's mind raced, muscles burned, but determination sharpened her focus. The storm would not win. Not today. Not while she was in command. And as she began the delicate descent through the violent clouds, a new sense of urgency hit her, something unseen yet palpable. Another bolt of lightning illuminated the storm in white-hot fury, and Emily realized that the next moments would test everything she had ever learned. The storm was about to challenge her in ways she had never faced before. The storm showed no mercy. Rain lashed against the canopy, wind gusts twisted the jets, and lightning split the sky in blinding bursts. Emily's eyes flicked between her instruments and the silhouette of the young pilot's F-16 behind her. Every vibration, every subtle shift of the tether, was a pulse of life she could not ignore. One miscalculation now, and the impossible maneuver that had saved him moments ago would be meaningless. Her heart hammered in rhythm with the turbulence, muscles coiled like springs ready to react. She had stabilized him once, but navigating both jets safely through the storm toward base would test every skill, every instinct, every ounce of nerve she possessed. Emily's hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times, yet each motion carried the weight of life-or-death stakes. The radio crackled with static. "Ghost Rider, visibility is dropping. Ground crews report severe wind shear near your approach path. Do you copy?" "I copy," Emily replied, her voice calm despite the storm raging around them. "Stay focused, trust the tether, we're almost there." The young pilot's F-16 lurched violently behind her. Sparks erupted along the wingtip, trailing smoke as the jet fought the storm's relentless pull. Emily's stomach dropped. She had to compensate now. Adjusting her pitch, thrust, and angle, she maneuvered her jet in perfect harmony with the tethered aircraft. Every instinct screamed for precision, every fiber of her being demanded perfection. Lightning illuminated the city below, a sprawling network of streets and buildings oblivious to the chaos in the skies above. Cars swerved as thunderstorms battered the roads, but Emily had no room for error. She threaded the jets through gaps in the storm, avoiding skyscrapers and transmission towers, every movement calculated and instantaneous. Her mind worked at a speed that felt almost supernatural, processing wind currents, jet velocity, and tether tension simultaneously. The tether vibrated violently. A sudden gust threatened to snap it. Emily's pulse spiked. Her hands flew over the controls, twisting, turning, pulling both jets back into alignment. Sparks shot into the air as metal threatened to grind against metal. She felt the strain in every muscle, every nerve ending. Her breath came in ragged bursts, but she did not falter. She could not falter. The young pilot's voice cracked through the radio. "Ghost Rider, I think I'm losing altitude too fast." Emily's stomach lurched. The jet was spiraling toward a dangerously low altitude, and the storm was intensifying. She clenched her jaw, leaning into the controls, calculating a rapid recovery maneuver. She remembered the emergency drills, the split-second adjustments, the thousands of simulated hours spent preparing for this exact moment. But simulations were nothing compared to reality. The unpredictable storm, the trembling young pilot, the city below. "Hold on," she shouted. "Trust me, follow my lead." She executed a sharp climb, pulling the tethered F-16 with her. The jet behind groaned under the strain, but the maneuver held. Emily could feel the young pilot's relief radiating through the tether, a silent acknowledgement of trust. But there was no time to celebrate. The storm was far from over, and the approach to base would be even more treacherous. Lightning cracked close enough to make her eyes water. Rain pelted the canopy, creating a whiteout effect. Emily adjusted her flight path, banking sharply to avoid a collision with towering cumulonimbus clouds. The tether vibrated violently again, and she knew it would only hold for so long. One more gust, one more misalignment, and disaster would strike. Her mind raced, scanning options. She could attempt a direct approach to the base, but the wind shear could flip the tethered F-16 in an instant. She could try a circling maneuver, buying time, but each second spent in the storm increased the risk of structural failure. She had to choose, and she had to commit. There was no room for hesitation. "Ghost Rider, what's your plan?" the young pilot asked, his voice trembling. Emily exhaled, forcing calm into her tone. "We're going to circle the storm edge, using the updrafts to stabilize us. Follow my lead precisely. Don't fight the wind, use it." The young pilot nodded, fear still evident but mingled with trust. Emily adjusted the throttle, banking sharply, guiding both jets toward the storm's outer edge. The maneuver was delicate, threading between violent gusts and sudden downdrafts. Sparks flew from the tether as the metal groaned under tension. Every second felt stretched to infinity, every motion critical. As they began to gain altitude, Emily felt a flicker of hope, but it was fleeting. The storm seemed to respond as if aware of her strategy, lashing out with increased intensity. Lightning cracked dangerously close, illuminating the violent turbulence around them. The tether shuddered violently, threatening to snap. Emily's stomach twisted, fear sharpening her focus into a laser-like precision. She leaned forward, eyes scanning instruments and canopy simultaneously. Her hands moved with practiced agility, making micro-adjustments that only experience could teach. The jets responded, though the tether creaked ominously. Rain and wind battered them relentlessly, and the young pilot's F-16 shuddered with every gust. "Almost there," she muttered under her breath. Her voice was a lifeline both to herself and the young pilot. She could feel his tension, his trust, and the weight of responsibility pressed against her like gravity itself. The base came into view, a distant cluster of lights through the storm's haze. But the approach was perilous. Wind shear threatened to twist the tether, buildings loomed like jagged teeth below, and the young pilot's jet was barely responsive, trembling with every gust. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. One misstep now, and the rescue would end in catastrophe. Lightning illuminated the sky again, closer than before. Emily's hands flew over the controls, executing a rapid descent while compensating for turbulence. The tether strained, sparks flying, but it held. Inches from disaster, the jets aligned, and Emily guided them toward a narrow corridor leading to the runway. Her jaw clenched, muscles screaming, but focus never wavered. She had stabilized him once, pulled him through the storm, and now she had to bring them home safely. The storm was a living adversary, relentless and unforgiving, but Emily was the master of her domain. As the jets descended, lightning illuminated the city below, and Emily saw the fear on the young pilot's face, mingled with awe and relief. She felt a pang of emotion, a mix of pride, responsibility, and unspoken connection. She had saved him once, but the final moments were still to come. The runway loomed ahead, a ribbon of light through the storm's fury. Emily adjusted throttle and pitch, aligning both jets for the final approach. The tether creaked ominously, threatening to snap, but her hands were steady, her instincts flawless. Every second was a test of nerve, skill, and courage. The storm seemed to roar as if daring her to fail. Emily leaned forward, jaw tight, eyes locked on the runway. She whispered a single thought to herself, a mantra of survival and determination. Bring him home, no mistakes, not now. And in that heartbeat, with the tethered jets shuddering violently, the storm raging around them, and the runway still hundreds of feet away, Emily realized the final descent would test everything she had ever known. One wrong move, and the lives of both pilots, and everyone below, would hang in the balance. The storm had one last challenge for Ghost Rider. The storm's fury had reached its peak, a maelstrom of wind, rain, and lightning that turned the sky into a chaotic canvas of white and gray. Emily's F-16 cut through the turbulence, tethered to the young pilot's struggling jet like a lifeline threading through a tempest. Every gust threatened to snap the delicate connection. Every bolt of lightning illuminated the fragile line of hope stretched taut between them. Her jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, and her mind raced through calculations faster than thought itself. The runway lay ahead, but reaching it would require more than skill. It would demand courage, nerve, and perfect timing. The young pilot's hands shook visibly, and she could feel his tension transmitted through the tether. He was terrified, and yet he clung to the lifeline Emily had provided, trusting her completely. That trust was both a blessing and a weight, pressing down with the gravity of responsibility. Emily had stabilized him once in the storm, but landing both jets safely was a far more delicate and dangerous challenge. "Keep her steady," she shouted over the roar of the engines and the storm's unrelenting assault. "Trust the tether, follow my lead." Lightning split the sky, blinding in its intensity. Emily felt the turbulence jerk the tethered jet violently to the side. Sparks arced between the aircraft and smoke trailed from the wingtip. Her stomach twisted as she executed a precise countermaneuver, adjusting throttle and pitch to absorb the violent pull. Inches separated success from catastrophe, life from death. She couldn't allow herself to hesitate. She hadn't come this far to falter now. The runway lights flickered faintly through the downpour, a distant promise of safety. But the approach was perilous. Wind shear threatened to throw the tethered F-16 into a violent spin, and gusts of wind could slam both jets into disaster. Emily adjusted, compensating for turbulence with micro-movements honed from years of combat and emergency maneuvers. Her mind and body were perfectly synchronized, each twitch of the controls a calculated response to chaos. She thought briefly of her life over the past 9 years, the quiet mornings, the predictable routines, the sense of being lost in anonymity. None of that mattered now. All that mattered was this single, high-stakes rescue, suspended in the storm above a city unaware of the danger raging above them. She could feel the adrenaline pulsing through her, sharpening her senses, freezing fear into clarity. "Ghost Rider, I don't know if I can." The young pilot's voice trembled, barely audible over the storm. Emily's chest tightened. She felt a wave of empathy but forced it aside. Compassion was essential, but panic would be fatal. She spoke with calm authority, her voice cutting through the storm like a lifeline. "You can. Focus. Trust me. I've got you. We're almost home." The tether groaned, vibrating violently as a gust threatened to tear it from alignment. Sparks shot from both jets, painting streaks of fire across the gray haze. Emily adjusted her throttle, twisted her jet to compensate, and whispered a mantra under her breath. Steady, precise, focused. Bring him home. Every word was a prayer and a command at once. The jets lurched as another bolt of lightning split the sky. Emily's stomach lurched, and her hands moved instinctively, correcting angles, balancing thrust, and maintaining perfect alignment. The tethered pilot responded, following her lead, but the storm was relentless, each gust a challenge to her skill and nerve. The runway was closer now, but the final approach would test everything she had learned in her Air Force career, and then some. "Brace yourself," she muttered to the young pilot, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "We're going to line up with the runway. Follow my every move exactly." She angled her jet carefully, threading between gusts, avoiding debris and compensating for violent turbulence. The tether vibrated violently with each movement, threatening to snap. Emily's hands were a blur across the controls, her mind calculating angles, speed, wind shear, and tether tension simultaneously. Every variable mattered. One misjudgment could turn a successful rescue into disaster. The runway lights grew clearer, illuminating a narrow corridor through the storm. Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. The tether was stretched almost to its limit. Another gust could sever the fragile lifeline. Sweat stung her eyes, muscles screamed in tension, but her focus never wavered. She had trained for emergencies like this, but nothing had truly prepared her for the raw unpredictability of a storm this violent. A sudden lurch of the tethered jet sent sparks arcing violently. Emily's stomach dropped. She pulled hard on the controls, twisting, climbing, banking, and aligning the two jets in perfect unison. Inches separated life from death, success from failure. Her heart raced, each second stretching into eternity. She felt the young pilot's fear and trust collide in a silent, palpable wave. Almost there," she whispered, guiding them through the final corridor. Rain pelted the canopy in sheets, and gusts of wind threatened to twist both aircraft violently, but Emily's hands were steady. Every calculation, every maneuver, every instinct converged into a single, flawless rhythm. The runway was close enough to see, but one final adjustment was needed. She leaned forward, focusing on the instruments and the visual alignment. "Line up with the center lights," she instructed. "Throttle steady, keep the wings level, you can do this." The young pilot followed her commands, trembling but obedient. The tether shuddered violently one last time as a final gust of wind threatened to throw the F-16 off course. Sparks flew, the metal groaned, and Emily felt the strain in every fiber of her being. But she refused to falter. She had come too far, fought too hard, and she would not let the storm claim another life. With a subtle adjustment, a flick of the throttle, and a controlled descent, Emily guided both jets into perfect alignment with the runway. The tether vibrated violently, but it held. The young pilot's jet mirrored her movements flawlessly, and for a brief, suspended moment, there was silence, only the roar of engines and the relentless rain. Emily exhaled, muscles trembling, sweat stinging her eyes. She wasn't safe yet. The landing would be the final test, the moment where all precision, courage, and trust would determine the outcome. She pushed forward, guiding both jets down the runway, banking slightly to compensate for wind shear, adjusting thrust with meticulous care. The wheels of her jet kissed the wet tarmac, spraying rain in arcs behind them. She kept her hands steady, guiding the tethered jet in perfect synchronization. Sparks flew as metal scraped dangerously close, but the young pilot's F-16 descended safely behind her, wings level, landing intact. For a heartbeat, Emily allowed herself to breathe. Then a final gust of wind threatened to push them off course. Her hands tightened on the controls, eyes locked on the runway's edge. The tether shuddered violently, and in that instant, time slowed. One final adjustment, one precise move. Both jets rolled to a stop, engines roaring, tether slackened. Emily's chest heaved, adrenaline crashing in waves through her body. She allowed herself a fleeting smile, but her eyes immediately scanned the other jet. The young pilot's hands were shaking, visor fogged with rain and tears, but he was safe, alive. The storm still raged around them, but for a moment the impossible had been achieved. Emily exhaled, letting relief wash over her. But she knew the real challenge was just ending. 9 years away from the cockpit had tested her courage, her skill, and her nerve, but today she had returned to the skis as if she had never left. Her radio crackled with muted awe. "Ghost Rider, you did it, both jets down, incredible work, you saved him." Emily's hands relaxed slightly on the controls, but her eyes never left the tethered jet behind her. "He's safe," she replied quietly. "That's what matters." The young pilot unclipped, shaking, helmet off, and gave her a look of gratitude that words could never convey. In that fleeting glance, Emily recognized herself, the fear, the trust, the exhilaration of life hanging by a thread. She had returned to a world she had left behind, and for the first time in 9 years she felt alive in the skis once again. But as she looked toward the storm still raging overhead, a flicker of unease gnawed at her. The skis were unforgiving, and the world above was never truly tamed. Emily's return had been dramatic, violent, and impossible, but the consequences of the past, the storm, and her hidden history were not yet fully revealed. The storm had finally begun to relent, though the sky remained a turbulent canvas of dark clouds and lingering lightning. Rain still fell in sheets, masking the runway in a silvery haze. Emily's hands trembled slightly on the controls, not from fear, but from adrenaline still surging through her veins. Both jets sat safely on the tarmac, engines humming a low, victorious growl. The young pilot's F-16 shuddered once, then fell silent. He unstrapped himself, helmet in hand, drenched, exhausted, and utterly awestruck. Emily exhaled, feeling a profound mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion. Her chest heaved, adrenaline crashing in waves as the enormity of the rescue settled in. She stepped out of her cockpit, boots sinking into puddles on the runway, and glanced at the tethered pilot. His eyes met hers, wide and unblinking, a mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and newfound respect shimmering in his gaze. "You saved me," he whispered, voice hoarse from screaming over the storm. Emily allowed herself the faintest smile, though her mind was still racing. "No," she replied softly, voice steady but low. "We saved each other. You followed my lead. You trusted the tether and you didn't give up." The young pilot blinked, trying to process her words. But how did you do it? After all this time, you haven't flown in years. Emily's expression darkened, a shadow of her past briefly crossing her features. 9 years of living quietly, 9 years of leaving the Air Force behind, of burying memories of missions, medals, and call signs. No one in her civilian life knew who she had been. But today, above the storm, every instinct, every memory, every skill she had honed came rushing back in a torrent she couldn't ignore. She had been forced to return, not just to the sky, but to herself. A vehicle approached, headlights cutting through the misty runway. Uniformed personnel rushed toward them, rain slicked and urgent, radios crackling. Emily's mind immediately switched to assessment mode, noting the way the storm had shifted winds, checking the tethered pilot for injuries, ensuring both jets were stable. The training never truly left her. It had been dormant, yes, but not erased. "Ghost Rider," a voice called, cracking through the static. Emily recognized it instantly. The commanding officer she had once served under, the one who had given her her call sign in a past life. His coat flapped in the wind and his gaze was sharp, scanning the aftermath of her daring rescue. "By God, you did it." Emily's jaw tightened. Recognition, awe, and something unspoken passed between them. This was the moment she had avoided for nearly a decade, the past colliding with the present, her hidden life unveiled not by choice, but by necessity. She straightened, rain dripping from her hair and jacket, eyes meeting the officer's without flinching. "I had no choice," she said, voice low but firm. "He was in the storm, and I was the only one who could get him out alive." He nodded, taking in the damage, the tension, the undeniable skill that had guided two fragile lives through a storm that could have claimed them in an instant. 9 years, he murmured, almost to himself. "And the moment you return, you save a life in a way only Ghost Rider could. No one else could have done it." The young pilot, still shaking, finally found his voice. "Ghost Rider, you're incredible. I don't even know how to thank you. You didn't just save me, you saved all of us." Emily felt a rush of emotion, unfamiliar yet grounding. Pride, relief, validation, but also a pang of something deeper, a realization that she couldn't erase her past anymore. The call sign, the missions, the life she thought she had abandoned, they were a part of her, and today had proven that even in civilian life she could not hide what she had become. The commanding officer gestured toward Emily, voice rising to be heard over the still raging wind. "Report to the debriefing room immediately. Your actions are going to make history, Emily, and it's time the world knows the truth about Ghost Rider." Emily's stomach tightened. Exposure, recognition, praise she had avoided for nearly a decade. But looking at the young pilot, alive because of her, and seeing the remnants of the storm behind them, she realized something crucial. The risk, the fear, the adrenaline, it had reminded her of who she really was. She walked toward the debriefing team, boots splashing in puddles, heart still hammering. The young pilot followed, still shaken but now with awe radiating from every movement. Media teams had already begun to arrive at the perimeter, drawn by reports of the extreme weather and emergency landing. Emily's hidden life was about to become public knowledge. She had expected shame, scrutiny, questions she couldn't answer, but instead she felt a sense of calm determination. Inside the debriefing room, the officer laid out a detailed account of the events, praising Emily's instincts, skill, and nerve under conditions that would have broken most pilots. Screens displayed radar tracking of the storm, jet trajectories, and tether dynamics, proof of her flawless execution. Every maneuver, every split-second decision, every ounce of experience had been validated. Emily remained silent for a moment, letting the recognition sink in. After 9 years, she had returned to the sky, not for glory, not for accolades, but because someone's life depended on her. And in doing so, she had reminded herself that her skills, her instincts, and her courage were still very much alive. The young pilot approached, hesitating. Do you ever think about going back up there for good?" he asked softly. "After today, I mean, you're extraordinary." Emily smiled faintly, a glimmer of the old Ghost Rider in her eyes. "Maybe," she said, voice quiet but resolute, "maybe it's time I stop hiding." Her commanding officer nodded, understanding more than words could convey. "You can't run from who you are, Emily. Ghost Rider never truly left. Today proved that. The Air Force and the world needs people like you, and so do the skis." The young pilot looked at her with awe, and Emily felt the weight of her past and the promise of her future collide. 9 years of hiding, of living in shadows, had been broken by a storm, a tether, and a single life hanging by a thread. Today, she had returned, not just as a pilot, but as a symbol, as Ghost Rider reborn. Outside, the storm began to clear, clouds parting to reveal slivers of sunlight cutting through the gray. Emily looked up, breathing in the fresh, rain-washed air, feeling the wind on her face, and the exhilaration of survival, skill, and purpose coursing through her veins. The city lay below, unaware of the hero above, but she didn't need recognition. She needed the skis, and the skis needed her. As she prepared to leave the debriefing room, she turned to the young pilot, a rare smile breaking across her rain-drenched face. "Remember this," she said. "Trust instincts, trust training, and never let fear control you." He nodded, inspiration mingling with awe, the kind that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Emily stepped outside, boots splashing in the last puddles of rain. The storm had passed, but its echoes would linger in memory, adrenaline, and legend. Ghost Rider had returned, not quietly, not anonymously, but with a purpose renewed and a legacy reclaimed. And as the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light on the wet runway, Emily knew that nothing would ever allow her to hide again. The skis had called her back, and this time she was ready for whatever came next.